So the original brief, the original thing was this growing a skyscraper. So the idea here is that we can currently gene engineer bacteria to do specific things, but in 50 years' time we'll be able to gene engineer growing material to grow into specific pre-programmed structures. And the point is that they'll be able to grow in a way that not only has been pre-programmed for the functions that we want, but has potentially been, will be able to adapt to the environment as it goes. And we'll be thinking about a lot, so this area is currently called computational morphogenesis. I didn't name it. And the point being that a lot of people think about animals as a basis for thinking about morphogenesis, how animals grow. But actually animals are much too complicated. They move around, they've got brains, they've got nervous systems and so on. Let's think of plants. Plants are much easier. And what do plants grow into? Well, if you think of trees, they grow into tall things. And if you think of skyscrapers, they're kind of tall things. Could we actually grow a skyscraper? And we're not necessarily thinking of like Jack and the Beanstalk, of having a magic bean and you plant one seed and it grows into a skyscraper. The idea is that we could potentially have a variety of seeds, more like gardening, where you plant an array of seeds, some of which may potentially grow into the walls, some of which grow into the electrical system, some of which grow into the sewage system, and so on. And then as the skyscraper is growing, you garden the growing system, so maybe you're pruning it to make it a particular shape, and so on. And the only technical difficulty is you have to work out what program to put in the seeds, and then you have to put it in the seeds. But in 50 years' time, we'll have solved that problem. So that's what I said to Adam, and then what Adam did.
So it's an amazing concept, isn't it? It's just the whole metaphor of gardening applied to growing buildings is just, this is the problem, that there's just so many different ways that you could take that in a story, in a short story. It's difficult to know what to leave out because there are just so many, there's just so much potential for applying different gardening metaphors to buildings. So I guess my starting point was trying to think, okay, how can I create drama out of this? How could it go wrong? What could be unintentional consequences of this, a project like this? In my story, it's still at a developing stage, but it's I guess it's told from two different points of view. One from the point of view of one of the researchers working on the intended use of this technology of growing really, really tall, the tallest skyscrapers the world has ever known, and then from the perspective of a girl who lives in what is essentially a shanty town that's been grown out of, so we take cuttings from plants. So people have stolen cuttings from the skyscrapers and then used them to germinate their own buildings. So whereas the intended use of the skyscrapers is that they grow a trellis structure first, and then the like modified vines grow through there and swell to form rooms, and then the electrical systems all grow through that. The stolen cuttings are they've just been planted in the ground and they're growing without a trellis, so there's no formal structure to so they're just growing out and spreading flatly, like one layer thick. So it's the two different sides, seeing it from two different points of view. I'll read a scene where the researcher goes for the first time to the trellis of the building, which has just been the first. It's like the first growth stage of it. So it's grown up to the shape of the building as the first stage before all the other parts of the building grow through and into it. It was the first of the super buildings at 1,456 metres, dwarfing all of their previous bioconstruction projects, breaking the 1 kilometre barrier that had been thought unbreakable for the last 3 decades, and redefining the word skyscraper. Although the Suzuki Trellis at that stage did not officially qualify as a functional building, as only its endoskeleton was completed, everyone talked about it in the same terms as a finished building, as if the 6 further years of growth required were just a formality and posed no real challenge. I should have started with the caveat. This is an early draft, so it's going to there are all kinds of clumsiness, so forgive that. Cal, the building's chief architect, had asked Jean to join him on a site visit to conduct vibration tests just below the rim of the trellis's growth tip, now that its growth had been terminated and the structure was hardening. There wasn't an engineer in the world capable of building the series of elevators necessary to convey people to the top of the still firming trellis, so they had to be flown there in a helicopter. The trellis could be seen from 8 miles away, poking through the top of the smog like the skeleton of a monstrous spear of asparagus. Every mile closer they came to the Suzuki Trellis, it grew another factor in size, making a model village of nearby Vegas. A temporary platform was bolted just below the growth tip. Jutting out from this was a shelf on which was the helipad. Jean had never experienced vertigo before, but once Cal had taken her hand to help her out of the helicopter and she was stood on the platform, the movement of the structure and its deceptive appearance of fragility made her feel like she'd lost her grip on the world. From up here, she could see everything, all the desert. The horizon bowed for her. In the center of the platform was a blank space, a square hole a couple of meters across. Of course, it was a terrible safety hazard, but it had been created to offer the unique, uninterrupted view down the inside of the skyscraper's trellis. And up here on the platform, it was impossible to take a careless step. Every footfall was considered instinctively. When Jean had finished taking her measurements, Cal bid her lie down beside him on the platform to look down into the core of the trellis. He went down onto his knees first, put his hands on the lip of the hole, and then lay down so that his belly was flat against the platform, his head projecting out into the hole. Jean lay beside him, their bodies aligned. He shuffled closer to talk above the sound of the wind ruffling the windbreaks wrapped around the platform's outer scaffold. From this position on her belly, the subtle swaying of the building made her feel a sensation something like flying. The movement engineered flexibility to allow the building to cope with the stresses of tectonic shifts and crosswinds would be much diminished once all the other architectural stages had grown through: the pods, the vascular systems, the electrics, and the photosynthetics. What a thrill it was to be inside the bare bones of the building. The pattern of its smooth, thigh-thick struts looked like the physalis lanterns she used to collect in her grandmama's garden every autumn, but grossly magnified. Despite her ability to reason how safe she was up here, the almost complete exposure to the sky triggered the most ancient part of her brain, making her heart pound and her throat close up. She'd once read an article intended for a male audience advising that on first dates one should take girls somewhere that would get their heart pumping. It advised roller coasters and scary movies. Any experience that got the heart pumping stimulated the attraction centers of the brain. Fear was the same as love to the lizard brain. Laying there, the small of her back sweating, she wondered whether Cal had read the same article. When she looked down through the center of the hole, the central cores twisted away from her in a diminishing double spiral. From this grew the branches and nodes that would soon scaffold the pods in which people would live and work. The shape of this hexagonal helix was repeated again and again, on an ever-decreasing scale as the nodes and branches shrank from a meter thickness down to a scale of millimeters. Staring down the eye of this mega-fractal, you could see a hexagon of clear space down the very center, all the way to the desert below. A staircase to infinity, Cal said. Staring into it, there was a sense of almost spiritual oblivion. Jean lost herself up there, lost her sense of self in a profound way that she'd never been able to re-experience despite her efforts. She supposed that an experience like that can only happen one time, the first time, before the generalization machine that is your brain builds a framework with which to understand it.